The spoon slipped from my hand before I even realized it. It clattered onto the kitchen tiles with a sharp metallic ring, and the sound seemed to echo far louder than it should have, slicing through the silence like a blade. "Mom, stop humming, it's annoying." David's voice was a whip crack across my back. He wasn't shouting, not exactly, but there was venom in the way his jaw clenched, in the way his palm slammed down on the back of the chair. I froze, the half-cut apple trembling in my fingers. The faint melody I had been humming, Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, the allegretto I'd carried in my bones since I was a girl, died in my throat. From the corner of the room, Rachel didn't even look up from her phone. She just rolled her eyes, her lips curling with that tight little smirk I had come to dread. "It's like you're stuck in the past," she muttered, each word dripping like acid. "You haunt this house with that same tune over and over." The kitchen light was too bright, too white. It cast their faces in cold shadow, as if the warmth had been drained from the room. My chest constricted. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I stared at the spoon on the floor, its handle vibrating against the tiles, as though it carried the tremor of my heart. I wanted to answer them, to defend myself, to explain that humming was not madness or obsession, it was habit. It was comfort. It was the residue of a life spent on stage. A violin beneath my chin, the orchestra swelling around me. Music had been my world, my livelihood, my offering to my family. And now, reduced to a nervous hum in my own kitchen, it was enough to disgust them. David pushed back his chair, the legs scraping hard against the floor. "Seriously, Mom," he snapped, his voice louder this time. "Can't you just stop?" I swallowed hard, forcing my throat to open, but no words came. My tongue felt heavy, my lips numb. Instead, I bent down slowly, almost mechanically, to pick up the fallen spoon. The tile was cool against my fingertips. My knees cracked as I knelt. And for a brief second I thought of how many times I had done this very thing, kneeling, cleaning, bending myself smaller for the sake of peace. When I stood again, the kitchen was silent. David had turned away, scrolling his phone now, pretending I wasn't even there. Rachel crossed her arms, satisfied, as if she'd finally put me back in my place. And me? I just stood there, the unfinished apple still in my hand, its pale flesh browning in the open air. My heart beat against my ribs like it wanted out. I wanted to scream, to remind them who I was, to remind them that once upon a time, people paid to hear me hum. They dressed in gowns and tuxedos. They clapped until their palms were red. They whispered my name with reverence. Eleanor Parker, violinist, mother, provider. But my son didn't see any of that. My daughter-in-law never cared. All they saw was an old woman, lost in her own echoes. The spoon lay quiet now on the counter, its shine dulled under the harsh light. In its stillness, I saw myself silenced, diminished, erased. And yet, somewhere deep inside, the allegretto still pulsed, stubborn and alive. The melody that had carried me across continents, through poverty and sleepless nights, through concerts and hospital shifts, through widowhood and motherhood, it refused to die. I gripped the apple harder, juice seeping sticky between my fingers, and forced myself to meet my own reflection in the darkened window above the sink. My face looked ghostly in the glass, framed by the sterile kitchen light. My lips trembled. I whispered to myself, so low they couldn't hear, "It's only a song." But maybe it's the last piece of me left. That night, long after they had gone upstairs, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the spoon beside me, the silence heavier than any applause I had ever stood in front of. Their words still rang in my head, sharp and merciless. "Stop humming, it's annoying." They didn't know. They couldn't know. That very melody they despised, the one they mocked, the one they wanted to silence, was the thread tugging at the fabric of their lies. It was the key that would unravel everything they had built on top of me. When I close my eyes, I can still feel the stage lights on my face. 30 years of my life were spent under those lights, sometimes hot and blinding, sometimes soft and golden, but always steady, always waiting for me. I was 21 when I first held the chair of second violin in the Chicago Symphony. My bow shook the first night, not from nerves, but from the sheer electricity of being surrounded by 100 other musicians, all breathing as one. I told myself I would never squander that gift, and I didn't. For 3 decades, I played Brahms, Tchaikovsky, Beethoven, concert halls across Europe and Asia. The applause always felt like thunder rolling right into my bones. But applause doesn't pay tuition bills. Applause doesn't cover rent. So while the audience cheered, I worked quietly backstage at Life Careful Budgeting, double shifts during festival seasons, recording sessions in the early mornings. Each tour brought in just enough to keep us afloat. When David was accepted into law school, I remember the letter arriving on thick cream paper. He waved it in front of me like a trophy. "Mom, we did it," he said, his eyes shining. We. I liked that word. It meant my sacrifices weren't invisible. That year alone, I wired him $20,000 from my overseas concert earnings. 20,000. It was nearly half my season's income, but I didn't blink. I lived off instant noodles in hotel rooms, wore the same black concert dress until the fabric went thin at the seams, and smiled at every encore, because every note I played, every bow I drew across the strings, felt like it was feeding my child's future. Maybe I confused sacrifice with love, I whisper now, the thought as bitter as vinegar in my mouth. In those days, I didn't count the money I sent, only the pride, rent for his apartment, textbooks that cost more than my monthly groceries, even the car he said he needed to get 2 internships. It all flowed from my account to his, as naturally as breath, and I told myself it was worth it. Because when David stood on stage at his graduation, shaking hands with the dean, I was there in the audience. I clutched the program like a holy script. He found me afterward, hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe, and whispered, "You're my hero, Mom. I'll never forget what you've done." Those words should have lasted a lifetime. But memory fades faster than music. In my living room sits a violin case older than David himself. Its leather is cracked, the brass hinges tarnished, but inside lies my first violin, the one my teacher, Mr. Gallagher, gave me when I was 15. The wood has darkened with time, but when I press it to my chin, I swear it still hums back, alive and waiting. I dreamed of passing it down to my grandchild someday. A silly dream, maybe, but music is inheritance too. I imagined small fingers learning scales, squeaking their way through "Twinkle, Twinkle," while I guided their bow. I imagined them asking why the violin smelled faintly of rosin and old wood, and me telling them, "Because it remembers every song I ever played." But that violin now sits locked away in my bedroom closet, behind a door I rarely open. Because lately, when David visits, I notice small things. The way his eyes flick to the case. The way his hand hovers just a little too long near my dresser drawer. Once, I caught him with my spare keys in his pocket. He laughed it off, said he needed to check something in the basement. But later, when I went upstairs, I found the drawer to my desk slightly ajar. Inside that desk is a folder of sheet music, my handwriting scrawled across yellowed pages. Not valuable to anyone but me, yet I felt a chill. Why would my own son sneak into my things? I replay these details at night, when sleep refuses to come. The concerts, the applause, the long flights home, where I'd tuck my head against the airplane window and dream about David's, smile when I surprised him with another check. I remember pawning my husband's old watch, the one he wore every day until the cancer took him. It fetched just enough to cover David's final semester's rent. I told myself my late husband would have wanted it. But when I picture that empty spot on my dresser, I wonder, did I mistake desperation for devotion? Even the violin bears scars of my giving. The fingerboard is worn smooth, the bow frayed from overuse. I refused to buy a new one because every dollar mattered. My colleagues upgraded to Italian instruments. I clung to mine, patched with rosin and memory. And still I told myself, this is love. This is how mothers love. But standing in my kitchen now, with my son calling my humming annoying, I feel the weight of all those choices pressing against me. I see the money wired, the watch pawned, the dress mended, The hours I bent my back over music stands, all of it invisible to him now. One evening, months ago, I had walked into the living room quietly and found David rifling through my desk. He jumped, slammed the drawer shut, and forced a smile. "Just looking for stamps," he said. I wanted to believe him, but later, I noticed my folder of handwritten compositions slightly askew, a page bent at the corner. My heart tightened. Those compositions are worthless on the market, but priceless to me. They are pieces of my soul. Notes. I scribbled in hotel rooms when I was lonely, ideas for duets I never played. And the way he shut the drawer, too quickly, too forcefully. It wasn't stamps he wanted. That image still burns in my mind, his hand on my music, like a thief. Sometimes I wonder if I ever taught David what love actually meant. Perhaps I only taught him that love was money. That affection came wrapped in dollar bills and tuition checks. Maybe I trained him to see me not as a mother, but as a bank account with a pulse. The thought makes me sick. So I hum. I hum because it is the only thing left that is mine alone. The only part of me they haven't yet taken. And maybe that's why it irritates him so deeply, because it's not his. Because it's not theirs to control. I run my hand over the old violin case, the leather ruff under my fingertips. It has waited decades for new hands. Now I'm not sure it will ever find them. I whisper into the silence of my room, the same sentence I've carried in my chest but never dared to say aloud. I thought music bound us, but maybe it only bound me. It was a Tuesday morning, gray and damp, the kind of morning where the sky pressed low against the rooftops as though it, too, carried a burden. I sat at my desk with a cup of coffee cooling untouched beside me, sifting through the quiet routine of bills and bank statements. That was when I saw it. The savings account I had opened years ago, funded by the sale of my old cello. The last instrument my late husband had ever touched was empty. Not reduced. Not diminished. Empty. My breath caught, and I leaned closer to the screen, blinking as if my eyes had betrayed me, but the numbers did not change. 0. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling my heart hammer beneath my ribs. That account was supposed to be my cushion, my safety net, the one thing I had tucked away for myself after decades of giving. I had sold the cello reluctantly, promising myself that even if the violin left my hands one day, the cello's sacrifice would protect me. And now, it was gone, wiped away in silence with no word, no explanation. A chill traveled down my spine. I opened the ledger, tracing each transaction with trembling fingers. The withdrawals were regular, systematic, amounts just small enough to avoid triggering suspicion at the bank. But together, they drained me dry. And the name attached to the transfers, my son's. For a long moment, I could only stare, my vision blurred with tears. I refused to let fall. I clutched a worn sheet of music from the drawer beside me, the ink smudged from years of handling. My hands shook so violently, the page rattled like a leaf in the wind. "Am I funding their life at the cost of my own?" I whispered. The words cracked in my throat, a confession to the empty room. Inside me, a war erupted. One voice, the mother in me, pleaded, "Stay quiet. He needs you. He always has. Isn't that what love is?" But another voice, louder, fiercer, shouted back, "If I stay silent, I'll lose myself. If I speak, I may lose them. But maybe silence has already cost me everything." The questions spun like a carousel in my mind. If I stop, will he hate me? If I continue, will I even survive? D.A. Do I deserve to keep even a fragment of my own life? I pressed the sheet music to my chest as though it were armor. The notes I had scribbled decades ago blurred before my eyes, but I felt them, every bar and measure, vibrating through my skin. Those notes were mine, untouched, uncorrupted. Proof that once I had created something no one could steal. And yet, hadn't I already allowed them to take everything else? I stood abruptly, my chair screeching against the floor. My body moved before my mind could catch up, propelled by a rage I had never allowed myself to feel. I marched upstairs to my music room, a space that had become less sanctuary and more museum of a life past. The violin case sat in the corner, covered with a soft cloth. I yanked the cloth away, opened the case, and ran my fingers along the wood. The strings hummed faintly under my touch, a ghost of music waiting to be born. For years, I had left this room unlocked, as if inviting my children to enter, to share the pieces of me I still held dear. But I understood now, they didn't want to share. They wanted to possess, to control, to empty me note by note, dollar by dollar, until nothing remained. No more. With trembling determination, I carried the violin case to my bedroom. I dragged the old steel safe from under the bed, a heavy box I hadn't touched in years. The lock clicked open, stiff with age. I laid the violin inside, the bow beside it, and shut the lid with a decisive thud. The sound reverberated in my chest like a final chord at the end of a symphony. Next, I turned to my desk. I gathered the bank documents, the passwords written carefully in my own script, and tore them into pieces. My hands shook, not with fear, but with release. Then I logged into my accounts, changed every code, every PIN, every secret door they might pry open. Click, click, click. Each confirmation from the bank was a hammer striking chains from my wrists. When I finally sat back, the room was quiet but different, alive, almost breathing with me. My pulse slowed. My shoulders dropped. For the first time in years, the silence did not feel oppressive. It felt like space. I thought of David's voice, sharp and impatient. "Stop humming. It's annoying." And Rachel's, cold and dismissive, "You're stuck in the past." Maybe I was stuck in the past. But at least the past was mine. The present, if I didn't act, would belong to them. I looked at the shredded papers in the wastebasket, at the safe closed tight under my bed, at the glow of the computer screen confirming the changes, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control! I whispered it out loud, just to hear the truth take shape. I was no longer their open purse. I was my own locked violin case. And with those words, a strange calm spread through me, as if a bow had drawn across the strings of my soul and found me in tune once more. It didn't take long. 3 days after I changed the passwords, after I locked the violin away, the knock came at my door, not the gentle tap of a visitor, but the sharp, impatient pounding of someone who felt entitled to entry. When I opened it, David was already pushing past me. His tie was loose, his face flushed. Rachel followed, crisp folder in hand, her heels clicking against my hardwood like the ticking of a clock counting down. "Where is it?" David demanded, not even bothering with a greeting. His voice was low but coiled tight, like a spring ready to snap. "Where's the money? We counted on it." I shut the door slowly, deliberately, and leaned against it. My hands were steady, surprisingly steady. "I counted on respect," I said quietly. His head jerked back as if I'd slapped him. Rachel snorted, flipping the folder onto the dining table so the papers spilled, like cards in a rigged game. "Don't start this, Eleanor. Just sign. The guardianship is ready. You're not fit to manage your affairs anymore. We're only trying to protect you. Protect me." The words dripped with poison. I crossed the room, picked up one of the papers, and let my eyes scan the lines of legal jargon. Words like incompetent, power of attorney, bordiage, transfer of assets. My own name, written in cold black ink, like a death sentence. I slid the paper back across the table until it bumped against Rachel's hand. "I perform to packed halls," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut the air. "Don't you dare tell me I can't conduct my own life." David slammed his fist on the table, rattling the glasses in the cabinet. "This isn't about your old concerts, Mom. This is about reality. Bills, mortgages. We need stability. You humming around this house doesn't pay for anything." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I refused to back down. "And draining my accounts without my permission? Does that pay for your stability?" For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy. His eyes flickered, guilt flashing before it hardened back into anger. Rachel's lips tightened. "You're confused," she said coldly. "You've been forgetting things, misplacing documents. It's only a matter of time before the bank calls you incompetent themselves. We're doing this for your own good." I laughed then. Not a joyful sound, but bitter, raw, jagged. It startled even me. "My own good?" I whispered. "You want my money. You want my silence. Don't dress it up as protection." The room pulsed with tension. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the old wall clock, even the sound of my own breath. Slow, deliberate. Then, like instinct, I walked toward the corner where my violin case rested on a chair. I lifted it gently, opened it, and drew the instrument out. The wood gleamed under the light, worn but proud, like me. David groaned. "Mom, not this again." I raised the violin to my shoulder, not to play, but to hold, like a weapon and a shield all at once. My chin pressed into the familiar curve. My eyes burned, not with tears, but with clarity. "This," I said, my voice steady, resonant, filling the room like a single sustained note, "is not noise. This is my proof I'm alive." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "Ma, you sound insane." "No," I said firmly. "For years I gave everything. My time, my earnings, my body, my health. And when applause faded, when tours ended, I still gave. And you took. But no more." David's voice cracked, softer now, but desperate. "Mom, if you love me." "I do." I cut him off, my grip tightening on the violin. "I love you enough to stop letting you destroy me." For a long moment, the three of us stood frozen, locked in a tableau. My son with his clenched fists, his wife clutching her folder of lies, and me, an old woman with a violin. Yet I felt taller than I had in years, my spine straight, my voice my own. I set the violin gently back in its case, closed the lid, and snapped the clasps shut with finality. The sound rang like a gavel. Then I looked at them both, meeting their eyes without flinching. "I was not your background music," I said, each word deliberate, heavy with truth. "I was the composer of my own life." They did not come back the next day with flowers or apologies. They came back with a lawyer. The first envelope arrived on a Thursday, slit open at the top as if even the mailman had been curious. Inside was a letter full of long, grave sentences, phrases like capacity evaluation, adult guardianship, and best interest. It was signed by a firm I recognized from the billboard off the highway, gold letters on navy blue, promising family solutions. I held the paper at arm's length, as if distance could soften what it said about me. According to them, I was exhibiting cognitive decline. I hummed incessantly. I misplaced vital documents. I forgot appointments. I behaved erratically. It was a portrait of an unraveling woman, and it wore my name. I laughed at first, a thin, brittle sound. Then I folded the letter carefully and put it on my kitchen table beside the old spoon that had fallen on the night everything started. The spoon's handle caught the light, a small crescent of silver. Proof that objects could be loyal even when people were not. By evening, I had 2 voicemails from David. Urgent, wounded, weaponized. "Mom, you're not taking this seriously. We have to protect you." Rachel talked to a specialist. Another one, "Mom, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Just sign the papers. It's a formality." A formality. Like a guest book at the door to my own life. I made tea. I didn't drink, and stared at the violin case in the corner until the house filled with darkness. The next morning, I called a number I hadn't dialed in years. "Susan Miller," came the voice, low, steady, a memory wrapped in velvet. I could have cried at the sound of it. "Susan," I said, "it's Eleanor." A beat of silence, then warmth flooded the line. "Ellie? My God, how long has it been?" "Long enough," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "Do you still practice?" She chuckled. "Law never retires, darlin'. What do you need?" I told her everything, the humming, the letter, the drained account, how my son had stood in my dining room and told me to sign myself away. With each sentence, I heard the lawyer rise in Susan's breathing, the friend in the pauses. "Okay," she said finally. "First, you are not alone. Second, we're going to take this one step at a time. I want you to gather what you have: bank statements, your performance programs, anything that shows your routines, your independence. We'll build a picture of you that is real, not the one they've painted. I don't want a war, I whispered. It's already on your doorstep, she said gently. We'll make sure you have armor. That weekend, my house turned into an archive. I opened boxes I hadn't touched in years. Season brochures with my name in the program, tax receipts from overseas tours, emails from the church listing the children I'd taught every Saturday, even the schedule from the community center where I led a music appreciation group once a month. I printed my calendar, the one with doctor appointments I'd kept and grocery, deliveries I'd signed for, neat and ordinary. I sat at the dining table with piles around me, the wood disappearing beneath proof of a life lived in straight lines. In the middle of this, the doorbell rang. Mr. Thomas from next door stood on the porch with his cap in his hands and a shy smile. "Ms. Parker," he said, "I heard, well, you know how street talk goes. If you need someone to tell folks the truth, I can do that." "What truth is that, Mr. Thomas?" I asked, and my voice broke despite me. "That you taught my granddaughter her scales last week," he said, "and that your mind is sharper than mine." He winked. "You remember all her fingerings. I barely remember where I left my keys." I almost reached for his hands. "Would you be willing to say that to someone who might ask?" "I'd be proud to," he said. "You kept my Mary going through a hard year. The least we can do is keep you going through this one." When he left, I put a sticky note on a folder and wrote, "Nig Bor Thomas, Witness." The word looked like a lifeline. On Monday, I took my evidence to Susan's office, an old brick building with creaky floors and sunlight that softened the edges of everything. She hugged me in the doorway, then slipped into her chair and became all angles and focus. "Let's see what you've got," she said. I laid it out like a symphony. Bank statements showing my regular payments, the sudden siphoning, the pattern, letters from the church verifying my lessons, photos from last month's library workshop where I demonstrated basic bow holds to a row of starry-eyed children. I even brought the little ledger where I track my expenses in careful script: milk, coffee, rosin, electric bill paid on time. Small order in a world choosing chaos. Susan pored over each page. "Good," she murmured, tapping the church letter. "Very good." She nodded at the statements. "These look like unauthorized transfers. We'll deal with the banks separately." "What about the letter they sent?" I asked. She read it, then exhaled slowly. "This is aggressive and sloppy. They're building a narrative, Ellie, not a case. Our job is to make sure the truth is louder than their story." "It's the loud that worries me," I said faintly. "Sometimes lies are better amplified." "Then we become an orchestra," she said, eyes bright. "Not a solo." I wanted to kiss her for that line. The second envelope came 2 days later. It was heavier. Inside, a stack of papers covered in legal boxes and signature lines. On the last page, my name appeared in looping cursive. I recognized and did not recognize. My stomach lurched. They had my signature. Except it wasn't, not quite. The E was too enthusiastic, the L's too tall, the N curled like a child's. I lifted the page to the light. The strokes looked traced, careful, patient, criminal. The date was 2 weeks earlier, a Tuesday when I'd been at the church, teaching Lily from next door how to slide seamlessly from A to D without lifting her elbow. Forged. On a day I'd spent explaining that a gentle shift can be stronger than a jerky one. I don't remember crossing the room. I only remember my hands in the kitchen trash, pulling up the black bag, sifting past coffee grounds and paper towels and the peel of a clementine until I found it. The torn corner of a printout, my name half visible in that overeager script. Someone had practiced here. In my house. For a second, the room tilted. The refrigerator's hum grew monstrous, the ceiling too low. I closed my eyes and breathed in. 4s, inhale 2, hold 2, exhale 2, hold 2. Just as I teach my students before a performance. When the world steadied, I placed the scrap into a Ziploc and wrote the date. Then I washed my hands as if I could scrub betrayal from my skin. Bring it, Susan said over the phone, and her voice was the cool hand on my fevered forehead. Do not confront them. Do not call. Let me thread this needle. So, I brought it, along with the envelope and the stack. Susan spread them like a gambler considering odds, then smiled a small, professional smile that made me feel, for a dangerous moment, safe. This is very, very helpful, she said. If they're careless about process, they'll be careless somewhere else. We'll request everything. And, at least start a log. Times, dates, calls, visits. If a light bulb flickers, write it down. I nodded, pulled a small notebook from my purse, wrote log on the front, and felt instantly less breakable. Outside her office, the autumn wind caught the edges of my scarf and fluttered it like a flag. I thought of all the times I had bowed to applause, how the stage lights had warmed my face, how easy it had been to believe I would always be held. The sidewalk was cold beneath my feet but firm, the air cut clean through me. I could see the steeple of the church down the street where, in 2 days, I would teach a roomful of small hands that the bow belongs to the arm, not the wrist. The body remembers. So does the mind. Word spread faster than I expected. Mrs. Alvarez from the library called to say, very quietly, that a woman had come by asking odd questions about me, whether I missed appointments, whether I wandered the aisles, whether I looked lost. Mrs. Alvarez had stared the woman down and said, I ran my workshop better than most staff meetings. At the grocery store, a boy who bags my apples whispered that a man had asked if I often forgot my wallet. I told him, You're the only one who never needs a reminder about the senior discount, he said, grinning. You remind me. I wrote it all in the log. That night, I opened the safe and held the violin. I didn't play, I only felt its weight. The curve of its back fit my palm, the way old truths fit the body. Elegant, exact. You were not made to beg, I told it softly. Neither was I. When their attorney finally called me directly, his voice was honey over gravel. Mrs. Parker, let's resolve this amicably. Your children are concerned. The court will take their petition seriously. Will it take my evidence seriously? I asked. My neighbors, my students, my calendar, my bank log? A pause. If it comes to that. It already has, I said, and hung up before my courage fled. I wrote the time in the log and underlined it twice. On Sunday, the church's multi-purpose room glowed with afternoon sun. The children lined up with their tiny violins, chins tucked solemnly, eyes luminous. I paced in front of them, tapping a gentle rhythm on my palm. Breathe, I said. Let the breath make the bow move. Don't force it. Invite it. Lily's grandfather, Mr. Thomas, stood in the doorway with his cap crushed between his hands, watching me with a look that made my throat close. After class, he patted my shoulder. I'll be where you need me to be, he said. Say when? Soon, I said. I went home and added Mr. Thomas. Present at lesson. Observed teaching to the log. The third envelope was hand-delivered on a Tuesday morning by a woman in a blazer who wouldn't meet my eyes. It contained a date, a hearing set for the following month, and a list of documents they planned to submit, statements, affidavits, observations from people I'd never met. There was also a paragraph so slick with falsehood I had to sit down. They said I had wandered away from home at night, that a neighbor had helped me back. I called Susan. Let me guess, she said dryly. The neighbor's name is something like John D. Vague enough to be convenient? They had not listed a name. Good, Susan said. We'll ask. And Ellie breathed. We'll bring the church, the library, the grocery clerk, the calendar, the bank. We'll bring Thomas. We'll bring truth. And what if truth isn't loud enough? I asked, suddenly small. Then we tune it, she said. We make it ring. I placed the phone down and looked at my house. It had never seemed so full of papers, dates, names, and air made dense by determination. I had been afraid my humming made me small. But the more I gathered, the more I understood. A melody is not weakness. It is a structure. A spine. I opened the window and let the city air in. Far away, a siren rose and fell. Closer, A bus sighed at the corner. Somewhere, a radio played a song I knew by heart. I hummed, not because I was lost, but because I had found something. The note settled in my chest like resolve. They had mistaken my music for a tremor. They had dressed theft as care. They had drawn the map to my erasure and asked me to sign at the bottom. I sharpened my pencil, turned to a fresh page in the log, and wrote the sentence I wanted to carry with me into every room that would try to take me apart. They mistook my melody for weakness, but it became my weapon. It happened by accident. I was taking out the trash one chilly evening, the bag heavier than usual with shredded drafts of my old lesson plans. The air smelled faintly of damp leaves, the kind that stick to your shoes and refuse to let go. As I tied the bag, something caught my eye, a scrap of paper wedged between the coffee grounds and the peel of an orange. My name, written in looping black ink, glared back at me, but it wasn't my handwriting. I froze, the trash bag sagging in my hands. The E was too tall, the LP curved wrong, the rhythm off. My signature has always been brisk, efficient, a note struck clean. This one looked rehearsed, like a child imitating an adult's scrawl. My fingers shook as I dug deeper, pulling out more fragments. Pages torn, practice attempts of my own name, the edges smudged with graphite. Someone had sat here, in my house, forging me. My knees buckled, and I sank onto the cold kitchen floor. The tiles pressed hard against my bones. I clutched the scraps as though they were burning. My voice cracked into the silence. God, they're not just draining me. They're erasing me. The refrigerator hummed. The house creaked. And I understood, if I hadn't seen this tonight, if I had taken the bag straight to the curb, I might never have known. I sealed the scraps in a clear plastic folder and scribbled the date in my logbook with such force the pen tore the paper. Then I sat at the table, the violin case beside me like an old friend, and stared at the false versions of my name. I whispered to the instrument, as if it could hear, "They can forge my hand, but they will never forge my sound." That night, I called Susan. My voice shook but did not break. "I found it," I told her. "Proof." She exhaled, calm but fierce. "Bring it to me in the morning. Don't confront them. Let us build the wall before they throw the first stone." I pressed the phone against my ear, listening to her steadiness. The rage inside me shifted, no longer a wild storm, but a current with direction. I locked the violin in the safe before I went to bed. As the metal door clanged shut, I thought, so this is war. And I am not unarmed. AK. The weeks before the hearing blurred into a strange symphony of fear and discipline. Every morning, I rose at 7 sharp, brewed coffee, and sat at my dining table surrounded by folders. Bank statements in one pile, church letters in another, photographs in plastic sleeves, witness notes carefully labeled. My logbook stayed open, fresh entries neat and precise, times of phone calls, details of visits, even the moments when I thought someone had followed me home. From the library. Susan drilled me like a conductor drilling a hesitant orchestra. "Eleanor," she said, her glasses perched low as she tapped a paper, "when they ask if you forget things, what do you say?" "That I keep a calendar. Every appointment is there. Show them the calendar. Don't just say it." She paced the office, her heels clicking like a metronome. "When they claim you hum because you're losing grip, what do you say?" I lifted my chin. "That humming is memory, not madness. That I can recite every note of Beethoven's Seventh without a page in front of me." "Good," she said, smiling briefly. "Make them feel the music." At home, I practiced my testimony aloud. I stood before the mirror, the violin tucked beneath my chin, my reflection lined and weary but unbroken. At first, my voice trembled, my sentences tangled. But night after night, I grew stronger. My words sharpened into clarity. I am not incompetent. I am not fading. I am still me. Sometimes I faltered, staring at my own face. The lines looked deeper, my hair thinner. But then I would tighten my grip on the violin and remember the applause, the encores, the way audiences once held their breath for me. Was still that woman. I had to be. Support arrived from unexpected corners. Mr. Thomas came over one evening with a thermos of soup and a scrap of lined paper. On it, he'd written a statement. She taught my granddaughter scales. She corrected her bow hold. She remembered details week after week. He pressed the note into my hand like it was treasure. At the library, Mrs.'s Day, Alvarez handed me a signed affidavit. You led the workshop last month, she wrote. You explained the difference between major and minor chords with clarity. No, book could provide. Even the grocery clerk, the boy with freckles and shy eyes, gave me a note on receipt paper. She never forgets her list. She remembers my name when others don't. I gathered them all, placed them in a folder labeled Voices She. Still, fear gnawed at me at night. I would wake sweating, hearing Rachel's voice in the dark. Sign the guardianship. You're not fit to manage. I would reach for the violin case, pull it close, and let my fingers trace the familiar curve of wood. It grounded me. It reminded me that my hands still remembered precision, that my mind still commanded order. One night, unable to sleep, I whispered to the shadows, "If I don't stand now, I will vanish." The words steadied me. The night before court, Susan came to my house. She spread the folders across my table like a general reviewing maps before battle. "Tomorrow, they'll paint you as fragile," she said. "They'll say you hum, that you forget. Don't deny the humming. Own it. Show them what it is." I nodded. "Speak slowly," she reminded. "Let the judge feel your certainty. And if you tremble, rest your hand on the violin. Let it anchor you." After she left, I carried the violin to my bedroom and set it on the pillow beside me, the way a widow sometimes sleeps with a photograph. I closed my eyes, whispered one last vow. They will not write my ending. I will. And for the first time in weeks, I slept without waking. The gavel cracked against wood, and the sound ricocheted through the chamber like a gunshot. I straightened in my seat. My palms pressed flat against the violin case on my lap, feeling the familiar weight steady me. The navy dress I wore clung to my shoulders like armor. Around me, the courtroom swelled with whispers, with the rustle of papers, with the scent of polished wood and nerves. "Case number 3745, the clerk intoned. "In the matter of guardianship of Eleanor Parker." Guardianship? Such a gentle word for such a brutal theft. David sat across from me at the petitioner's table, his suit too sharp, his tie strangling him. Rachel leaned forward, whispering into his ear, her manicured nails tapping against the folder between them. Their lawyer, a tall man with graying temples, rose with the air of someone already convinced of his victory. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "this case is about protection. My client's mother has shown clear signs of cognitive decline. She hums incessantly, loses track of time, misplaces important documents. She has already jeopardized her finances. We ask that the court appoint guardianship so that her son may act in her best interest." Every word was a dagger, but I held still, my breath anchored to the violin's presence against me. He gestured in my direction. "Mrs. Parker hums to herself all day, clear sign of decline." The courtroom tilted slightly, a ripple of murmurs moving through the benches. My throat tightened, but before I could break, Susan rose. "Objection, Your Honor," she said crisply. "Counsel is equating music with madness. Mrs. Parker is a retired professional violinist with 30 years in the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. Humming is her language, not her lapse." The judge, a woman with steel gray hair and sharp eyes, tapped her pen once. "Sustained? Proceed carefully, counselor." The opposing lawyer smiled thinly, as though nothing had happened. Susan stepped forward when it was her turn, her heels firm against the floor. She didn't look at the lawyer. She looked at me, and I felt strength coil back into my spine. "Your Honor," she said, "the petitioners claim decline. Reclaim continuity. We will show you evidence that Mrs. Parker is not only competent, but active, precise, and engaged with her community." She nodded to the bailiff, who wheeled in a small monitor. With a click, the courtroom filled with sound. It was me, my own hands on the violin, recorded just weeks before at the church recital. The bow drew across the strings, and the allegretto of Beethoven's Seventh filled the room, each note ringing clear, deliberate, alive. The sound rose to the rafters of the courtroom, spilling into every corner. For a moment, there was no case. There was only music. I watched the judge's expression soften, just slightly. Her pen stopped tapping. "That," Susan said when the video ended, "is not decline. That is mastery." The first witness was Lily, my smallest student, barely 10 years old. Her legs dangled from the witness chair, too short to touch the ground. She clutched her tiny violin like a teddy bear. Susan knelt so they were eye to eye. "Lily, can you tell the court what Mrs. Parker does for you every Saturday?" "She teaches me," Lily said shyly. Her voice wavered but held. "She shows me how to hold the bow, and she remembers every note I play wrong." A ripple of soft laughter passed through the courtroom. Even the judge smiled faintly. "She remembers every note?" Susan repeated. "Yes," Lily nodded, gripping the violin tighter. "She never forgets, not even the little ones." I swallowed hard, my eyes burning. Next came Mr. Thomas, his cap in his hands, his voice strong despite his nerves. "I live next door," he said. "I see her every morning walking to the corner. I hear her teaching the kids. Last week, she corrected my granddaughter's fingerings before I even noticed. Her mind's sharper than mine, I'll tell you that much." The lawyer for David tried to shake him. "Mr. Thomas, do you have medical training to assess her cognition?" Thomas smiled, unbothered. "No, sir. But I know the difference between someone who forgets my name and someone who reminds me of it every time we meet." Laughter again. The lawyer sat down quickly. More witnesses followed. Mrs. Alvarez from the library, holding up her affidavit, the grocery clerk, cheeks red but voice proud, even the church pastor, who testified that I led children through scales with precision each week. Piece by piece, a picture formed, not of decline, but of life. Finally, it was my turn. I rose slowly, the violin in my hand, and walked to the witness stand. The oath felt heavy on my tongue, but I spoke it clearly. Susan asked the question softly, giving me space. "Mrs. Parker, do you hum?" "Yes," I said, lifting my chin. "I hum because I remember. I hum because 30 years of music lives inside me. Humming is not decay. It is memory. It is proof that I still exist. And do you manage your own affairs?" I laid the logbook on the table, the pages filled with dates and notes. Every bill paid, every appointment kept, every transaction recorded. I am not careless. I am careful because I know what's at stake. "Why are you here today?" I looked directly at David. His face was pale, his fists tight in his lap. My voice trembled, but I did not lower it, because my children mistook love for weakness. They thought they could sign my name, drain my accounts, silence my song. But I am not a fading echo. I am the composer of my own life. The opposing lawyer tried to corner me. "Mrs. Parker, isn't it true you sometimes forget where you place your keys?" I smiled faintly. "Once, and I wrote it down." I flipped to the logbook, pointed to the date. "Keys misplaced, found within 10 minutes. That is not incompetence. That is being human." The lawyer faltered. "Isn't it true you hum because you lose track of thought?" "No," I said firmly. "I hum because I remember too much to keep inside." The courtroom went still. At last, the judge spoke. She shuffled the papers before her, glanced at the monitor, at the violin case, at the trembling child's testimony fresh in the air. "This court has reviewed the petition," she said slowly, her voice echoing in the hushed chamber. "And we have reviewed the evidence. The claim of incompetence is unsupported. The allegations of cognitive decline are not credible. The petition is denied. Mrs. Eleanor Parker retains full autonomy over her life and her estate." The gavel struck again. Final. Resounding. I exhaled, a sob caught between my ribs and my throat. My hands tightened around the violin case, and for the first time in years, it did not feel heavy. It felt light. I turned to face the gallery, my voice breaking free in a whisper, half to myself, half to the world. In that echoing courtroom, My song finally drowned their lies. The house was too quiet when I came back. I shut the door behind me, and the click of the lock echoed down the hallway. For a long moment, I simply stood there, coat still on, the weight of the violin case heavy in my hand. I expected to feel triumphant, the way one does at the end of a concert when the audience rises to its feet. Instead, I felt the silence swallow me whole. I carried the case into the dining room and placed it on the table. My fingers fumbled with the clasps, the same way they had the night I first decided to protect it. But this time, the motion wasn't frantic. It was deliberate. When the lid opened, the familiar scent of wood and resin rose up like an embrace. I lifted the violin, set it under my chin, and drew a single chord across the strings. The sound filled the empty room, rich, resonant, alive. It was not a lament anymore, not the tired hum of an old woman dismissed in her own kitchen. It was something else, a beginning. I closed my eyes, the note still vibrating in the air, and whispered to no one but myself, I didn't lose them. They lost me. Later, I wandered through the rooms of my house as if seeing them for the first time. The armchair where David used to sit with his textbooks, the corner where Rachel once stacked boxes of her things, the hallway that still bore faint scuff marks from years ago when he ran through with a toy plane. They were all artifacts now, relics of a family that no longer existed in the same shape. I touched the wall, traced the faded marks with my fingertip. Once, I would have cried. Tonight, I simply acknowledged them, then moved on. Victory has a strange taste. It is not sweet, it is not bitter. It is hollow at first, like an echo in a vast hall. You expect applause, but all you hear is the sound of your own breathing. I sat at the kitchen table and made tea. The steam curled upward, fragile and fleeting. I remembered the courtroom. The judge's gavel, Susan's steady voice, little Lily's courage. Their faces surfaced and receded like waves. I thought of David, his eyes burning with something between rage and regret. For a fleeting second, I wondered if he hated me, if he would ever forgive me. Then I shook my head. Forgiveness was his work now, not mine. That night, I did not sleep in fits and starts as I had for weeks. I lay down with the violin on the chair beside me, the case closed, its presence a guardian. My dreams were not haunted by forged signatures or lawyers' voices. Instead, I dreamt of music, warm, unbroken lines of melody, a symphony rising from silence. In the morning, I brewed coffee, carried it to the window, and watched the lights spill across the street. The world looked ordinary. Mailboxes, cars, children racing to school. Yet something in me had shifted. For the first time in years, I felt untethered. Not lost. Free. I know people will say I won. And I did. But winning does not restore what was taken. It does not stitch back trust or turn betrayal into love. The wound remains, even if the court declares me whole. Still, as I held the violin that morning, I realized something else. Wounds can sing too. They can become part of the music. I lifted the bow and played again. Not a grand concerto, not a dirge, just a simple phrase. 4 notes. Rising, falling, rising again. A breath. A beginning. The room did not feel empty anymore. It felt like a stage waiting for me. And so I tell myself, freedom sounded like the first note of a long silenced symphony. I sold the house. I sold the house. The decision came quietly, not with the crash of a gavel or the weight of another fight, but with the stillness of an early morning when I realized I no longer wanted to live among walls that carried echoes of betrayal. Every corner of that house had become heavy. The scuffed hallway, the chair at the dining table, even the spoon that had fallen months ago. They were all artifacts of sorrow. So, I let it go. The realtor marveled at how little I argued about price. But I wasn't selling bricks and timber. I was shedding a skin. With the proceeds, I found a small apartment near the music library downtown. A modest place. 2 rooms, sunlight pouring through wide windows. The hum of the city below like a gentle bass line. When I carried the violin case into that new space, it did not feel like exile. It felt like arrival. Mornings became ritual again. I woke early, brewed coffee, and sat by the window as the sun spilled over the rooftops. Sometimes I switched to cappuccino from the cafe on the corner, its foam crowned with a leaf pattern that made me smile. The cup was warm in my hands, light as breath, nothing like the heavy silence that once pinned me in my kitchen. From my window, I could see people streaming toward the library, students, retirees, wanderers, all carrying books, notebooks, instruments. A tide of seekers. And for the first time in years, I felt like one of them, not a part, but among. I joined a community orchestra. Not professional, not prestigious, just people who loved music enough to gather. In a school gym on Tuesday nights. The first time I lifted my bow among them, I felt my body hum with recognition. The conductor gave the downbeat, and together we wove sound into air. No critics, no reviews, only joy. After rehearsal, we would gather at a diner, laughing too loudly over pie and coffee. I found myself talking again about music, about travel, about memories that no longer hurt. They listened. They laughed with me, not at me. With time, I dared more. I traveled to Italy, wandering galleries where canvases glowed with color. I stood before a Caravaggio and felt the paint pulse like music. In Florence, I listened to a street violinist play Vivaldi with such abandon that I closed my eyes and let tears slip freely. Not from sorrow, but from recognition. Life goes on. From there, I flew to Japan, where lanterns floated into the night sky like 1,000 small suns. Children laughed, drums echoed, and I lifted my camera to capture it all, though no photograph could ever capture the warmth of that light washing over me. For the first time in decades, I was not rushing back to anyone's demands. I was simply present, a woman among strangers, free. Back in my apartment, I made a choice about the violin. I did not play it daily anymore. Instead, I had it placed in a glass case, right by the bookshelf, where morning light touched it gently. It stood not as a chain binding me to my past, but as a witness. A reminder that I had lived, that I had fought, that I had chosen. When friends visited, they often paused before it, reverent. "It's beautiful," they would whisper. "Yes," I would answer, smiling. "It is. And so is what it stands for." Life settled into a rhythm. I tutored children at the library, teaching them to read music. I walked through the park at dusk, greeting neighbors by name. I joined a book club where we argued about novels over wine until our voices grew hoarse, and every night, before bed, I wrote a single line in my journal. Not about loss, but about presence. Today, I laughed. Today, I learned a new recipe. Today, the sun touched my face, and I let it. Little lines, little victories. Sometimes, in the quiet hours, I still thought of David. Of the boy who once hugged me at his graduation and whispered, "You're my hero, Mom." I wondered if he ever thought of me now, if he regretted what he had tried to take. But the ache no longer ruled me. Love can remain even when closeness cannot. And I finally understood that letting go of control does not mean letting go of. Love it means honoring it without destroying yourself. On a Sunday morning, as the bells of the nearby church tolled, I sat with my cappuccino and opened the window. The city hummed with life, layered and textured, like the overture of a great symphony. For once, I did not feel like background noise. I closed my eyes, listened to the city's music, and let my heart join in. And in that moment, I understood the truth I had been chasing all along. I was not their fading echo. I was my own symphony. I want to end this story. Not in a courtroom, not in a kitchen, but here, facing you. If you have stayed with me through every note, every silence, every trembling confession, then you have already given me more than I ever asked from my own family. You have listened. So let me speak directly. Thank you for walking this road with me. I am Eleanor Parker. Once told my song was annoying, now the keeper of my own key. There were nights I believed silence would bury me. That if I stayed quiet, if I kept humming softly under my breath, I could avoid conflict, avoid the sharp edges of betrayal. But silence did not protect me. It erased me. And when I finally chose to raise my voice, I discovered something I had forgotten. The world does not end when you say no. Sometimes, that's the moment it begins again. I don't know who you are as you read this. Maybe you are a parent, maybe not. Maybe you've been betrayed by the people you trusted most. Maybe you're carrying your own silence like a stone in your chest. So let me ask you a question. The same one I asked myself. The one that changed everything. If one day your own child tried to silence your voice, would you stay quiet? Or sing louder? My story is not unique. Somewhere, right now, another parent is holding back tears, afraid that speaking up will cost them love. Somewhere, another mother is staring at an empty bank account. Another father is hearing their child say they are no longer needed. And somewhere, someone is humming softly in a kitchen, praying that song won't be stolen too. Maybe your words can reach them. Maybe your story can. So I ask you, if my journey touched you, if it struck a chord in your own heart, do not let it end here. Leave a comment, share this story, follow, so that more voices can find each other. Somewhere out there, a parent is trembling in the dark, waiting for proof that they are not alone. Maybe your voice can give them courage. I close with this truth I had to fight to remember. I am not their silence. Kim, myfreedom.s.